Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works. And we're working on the MI-10 again. We're at the clutter zone as always, always cluttered. And there's no way in hell this giant box should be sitting here. So let's get rid of that. And the next step on the instructions is putting all of the windows in. You can see right there. And these two pieces of fuselage are not really glued together. I've just got them taped together. And that was just so I could get some idea how long this is going to be. And actually, they've been taped together for the last 2 years. So hopefully, I haven't got too much of a mess from the masking tape. I know you shouldn't leave tape on that long. But let's get these windows on. Okay, this was supposed to be a quick little project right before supper to kill some time. Hey, let's just drop some of the windows in. Do you remember how I gushed over how all the parts and transparencies fit on the MI4? Well, it looks like all of the windows on this, and Lord knows there's a lot of them, looks like they're all slightly oversized. So every window opening is going to have to be reamed out slightly. And to complicate things, these windows are going to have to be a really good fit and really well glued in, because obviously we're going to be masking them from the outside, and we don't want the windows to pip, pip, pip pop inside as we're fooling around with them. So that's the second window in, and all of the windows basically after this one are bubble windows, which makes things even more complicated, because obviously you want to make sure that when it's fully seated that it in fact is a bubble. As I turn this, you can see it looking there, that it's sitting proud of the fuselage. Oh well, I knew this was going to be a challenge when I bought it. I've put almost all of the windows in, and then I realized I hadn't actually explained how I'm getting these things to fit. So basically, what you want to do is you want to have a file. Ideally, you'd have a round file. I don't have a round file that's of a sufficient diameter. So a square one or a triangular one would do well, as probably work just as well. So what I've been doing is I've been testing each window frame to make sure, in fact, they are too small. And really, I have to applaud a model in that if they felt that their tolerance were such that they couldn't guarantee that the windows were going to fit, make the window glass so that it was always going to be bigger than the openings, because you can always enlarge the openings. If the openings are too big, there's nothing you can do to get the glass to fit. So you just put your file in and give it a few twists and have a window ready to go so you can test fit it. So this window still is not fitting, okay? You want to get it so that the transparency kind of almost makes it in. Like really, if you really forced it, you could get it to go in. And this one isn't quite there yet. So once you've reamed it out a little bit more, as I've done on this one, just take a solvent style glue, preferably a thin one that's fairly aggressive, like the Plasmod cement. Mine is Flexifile, but it's the same sort of thing. And you want to just kind of run it around the inside of the opening. So that way, you kind of get rid of any burrs or anything like that. And then once it's pretty much almost set, then you can pop your window in. And what you want to do is you want to push the window through the opening to the point where it's actually going to be sitting out of the fuselage, domed. As you can see, this one still has to be shoved through a little bit more. I just happen to have a paintbrush that's got a nice round end on it, and I've been using it to force the windows out to where they should be. Occasionally I'll push too hard and pop it right through, but you can usually fix that. So that's all the windows on the right side of the fuselage, at least the forward part in. And if I turn it at an angle, you can see that they all sit slightly proud, which is what you want from this sort of window. The important thing to remember is don't get too carried away with the file the first time, or else you're going to make the window opening too large. Better to enlarge it a little bit, test fit, say, oh, I need to do 1 or 2 more turns. Okay, now we're good. Rather than just get carried away and, no, now what am I going to do? I'm continuing with cockpit work because obviously we've got to complete that before we can start major assemblies. Here's the decal for the instrument panel. And yeah, it's only black and white, but I think it pretty much serves for what you're going to be able to see through the various transparencies. What's interesting, I think I mentioned this during the review, is the back side. You can see the back of all the instrument cases, and that's mainly because the nose is clear, so they're figuring you're going to see this. So what I did is I gave it a basic coat of gunmetal, and then I picked out the various instrument cases with 2 or 3 different silvers and brasses and aluminums and things like that, just to show that they probably didn't all come from the same factory and underwent the same manufacturing processes before being installed in there. Just gives a little bit of interest, and probably nobody will ever see it, but I know it's there. This is the roof of the cockpit, and of course you can see we've got another instrument panel above the pilots, and then we've got 2 subsidiary panels on the ceiling that are basically identical. Whether or not, once again, we're ever going to see these again, I don't know. So one of these, if you didn't put them in, you'd put it all together, you'd be like, oh no, I can see it. But if you do put them in, you never can see it. So anyone who's put together the Mi-26 by, and I'm going to mispronounce this, so don't tell me about it in the comments, Sveta. At any rate, it was also marketed by Revell. If you've ever put together that kit, the Mi-26, you'll know that the fuselage goes together from 2 sides, a bottom, a whole pile of other pieces. Everything has to come together perfectly to go together. And I will admit, when I built mine, I was like, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think this is all going to line up. And other than the windscreen being a little bit wide, everything in that kit did come together beautifully. Now, that kit had all kinds of mounting tabs and pins and things like this. This kit has none of that. So, the fuselage sides come together and glue onto the floor. And then the only point where they meet up at the top is here, there, and there. Okay? And they trap the rotor pylon here inside. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue one side on and get it as perfect as I can. And then I'm going to glue the cockpit here, and that will at least establish the width of the fuselage. Next will be the rotor pylon, and then finally the other side of the fuselage. So at any rate, if you look, you can probably see the white styrene that I've glued in here. And I'm going to be gluing more of these in various strategic locations. And that's just basically so that when I'm gluing it together, I'm not struggling with, I've got it lined up, it popped inside, and I've at least got something to back it onto. You can see basically how things are going to come together like that. And there's nothing super concerning yet. It looks like all the contours are correct, so we'll have to see. Okay, we're starting to glue together the big bits. And you can see that we've got a seam running here and here, and actually, all things considered, it doesn't look too bad. Might require a little bit of filler, but nothing too serious. And the contour on the front is looking good. And what I did is I lined everything up here at the front, but I actually glued this first. And then once this was setting, then I brought this together, because there is a slight bit of splay because you're trying to bring things together to a point here. So, and I've test fit the cockpit is going to be the next piece that goes in, and it seems to want to go in there pretty good as well. The cockpit's now been glued in, and it does seem to fit in there really, really well. So I've done a little bit of test fitting. I think I'm going to deviate from my original plan, which was to put the pylon in next. What I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this half in place. And it looks like if I don't glue the top, I should be able to put the pylon in, or the floor of the transmission in, and then bring it together near the end. And then that way, instead of kind of struggling to hold this thing in place while I get the sides in, I can get a really good fit on the side, and then I'll worry about the top later. So this will be the next seam I glue right here and here. And that's the right side of the fuselage glued on. Now we've got a little bit of a lip right here. This isn't perfect either, but you know what? I've put together mainstream kits that have had worse fit than this. So the next component will be our rotor pylon, or at least the guts of it. We'll get it in, and then we can start working on our engine nacelles. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a little bit of fit issues there, but hopefully nothing more serious than what we've seen so far. Just a quick note about the rotor pylon. You can see there's a little bit of roughness here where the two halves come together, front and back, and that's basically what happened. Is that's where the sprue attached to it, and by the time you clean it up, it looks a little rough. I'm not super concerned about that, because if we look at the size of the rotor head parts, I think we're going to have a hard time really seeing down at this. Hopefully I'm not wrong. Alright, we have our rotor mount in, and we've got both fuselage sides are glued on and glued together here. I was able to bring this together fine and up to about here, and then the gap was just a little bit too much. So what I did is I put some styrene in right there just to kind of fill in the gap, and then obviously I'll trim this down, and I'll have to do a little bit of filler there. And our upper cover to our engine cowling, you can see I've also put some plastic backers on there, and that's just so I should hopefully be able to get it to glue on without it slipping and sliding around. This part is not glued in place yet, but it literally, with those, as you can see, those white strips I glued in place, it literally snapped in place. Fit is not perfect, but it seems to be that I should be able to close it up without too much difficulty. And hopefully any gaps we should be able to take care of. You know what? We don't necessarily want to completely eliminate the seams, because there are supposed to be seams in these locations. We might need to do a little bit of rubbing down up here. But all things considered, despite how I feared that nothing was going to fit particularly well, this is going together fairly good. Fairly good? Fairly well? We are having success. While I'm waiting for some of the other stuff to dry, I put this, pretty sure, exhaust from the cooling of the transmission, because this would obviously be the inlet, this would be the outlet. And it's kind of a triangular assembly that fits up inside this slash back here. And if I flip it around, you can see there's the part right there. The fit wasn't brilliant, but all in all, it did go in there better than I thought. At first, I thought it wasn't even really going to fit at all. I ended up using some thick Tamiya glue to glue it in place, and that would take up some of the gaps. So really, there's very little that I'm going to have to fill. That little bit right there. Maybe a little bit up at the top right here. But there are fit issues, but they're minor fit issues. Usually with a limited run kit like this, you expect far more serious issues than we're having. I'm getting ready to assemble the tail, and as you can see, I've put a plastic strip in here, and then there's another one in the bottom, and that will just help to hold everything in place and give it a little bit more rigidity when it's glued together. And this just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now if we look inside, you can see the strips of styrene that I'm reinforcing the joints with, and in particular you can see there's some that are joining the tail to the main fuselage join there. And there was a little bit of a gap. I basically put as much glue in as I possibly could and then just smushed her all together as best I could. And so there's definitely going to be some seam cleaning up and some sanding and things like that. But as I said before, given the complexity of all these parts, it is going together pretty well. Probably going to eat those words later, but so far I really can't complain. So here's the belly of the beast. And there's a circular object here, which needs to be glued in. And it goes on from the inside. And the instructions don't tell you if it should go this way or this way. And I highly doubt if a picture looking up at that exists on the internet. And even if I look for it and don't find one, somebody will find a picture like the next day. I know, I'll put it crooked. Oh, yeah. That'll really make all the people with OCD go crazy. You know, I'm just looking at it now, and this hole is directly underneath the rotor head. So I'm thinking that when they're lifting a load without using a big fancy platform, and they want to put a long line on it or something like that, I think this is a door that basically slides out of the way, and the hook would come down from there. So, jeez, I still think it would go this way. So it would be kind of rolled up front to back. Test fitting had indicated that although it basically filled the space quite well, I was going to end up with problems in that the fuselage sides were going to want to be narrower than the actual, bottom piece here. So that's why I've added these plastic runners here. So that way that'll tend to keep the fuselage out where it should be, because otherwise there's going to be quite a bad step. So hopefully I can wedge this in. We will see. Now, keen-eyed viewers will look and say, there's nothing in there, Dan. You've just basically left this whole thing empty. Yeah, well, I don't think we're ever going to see anything through these windows. And not only that, I've seen a couple pictures of the interior of these, and basically it's just one big empty tube. There's some fold-up seats for passengers and things like that, but otherwise there's not a whole lot to see. There seems to be some soundproofing and things like that inside, but really it's just a tube. There's not a whole lot to see, and I don't think we're going to see much through these windows. So that's why no scratch building or anything like that is going on the inside. My main concern is getting the fuselage together, getting everything to fit, and getting a representation of the real thing together. I mean, it'd be different if there was a big cargo door that opened up or something like that, but there isn't. Well, that went in with a satisfying snap. I don't think those tabs could have worked better if they had have engineered them in themselves. There is a little bit, if we look here, of a ridge right there and there. And I don't know if I should be sanding that off or not. I think maybe I'll have to look at some pictures of the real thing to see if that is there. If it isn't, it's not a big deal because I'm going to glue it, and then if I have to sand that off, there's not really any detail that we're going to be hurting here. So we're getting into some really tricky assembly here. Of course, this is our air inlet in the front of the engine. This is the roof of our cockpit, and this is, of course, our windscreen. And the windscreen actually glues on to the underside of this control panel here. Now, I had to do a lot of filing on that control panel to get even an okay fit of this. And I'm probably still going to have to rub down a little bit of the transparency up here. No big worries because that's sheet metal anyway at that point. You can see the areas that are supposed to be clear, and there's almost, you almost can't even see the cockpit framing lines, let alone feel them. So that's going to be a challenge to do the masking for that. But you probably will definitely have to do some filing on the underside of the instrument panel that's up there. And that's not a big deal because, I mean, you won't be able to see it. And this is how it looks from the underside. And this is our nose. And you can see some silver paint there. And that's actually painted on the inside. And at first you'd think the area with all the framing is the transparent area. No. The area on the bottom here is basically the clear bit. And the reason I've put the silver on there, and then I'm actually gonna use some interior color on the areas inside, is when you look up inside here, you might see that. So I've decided to do it. But I mean, they've molded that framing in there, very, very heavy on the inside. But all of the other framing that you're going to need for painting purposes outside is almost non-existent. It's just barely there. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge when it comes time to do it. And I'm sure somebody's going to say, oh, X company makes magic masts. I don't have any of those, and I don't feel like waiting for them, so I'm just going to press on without them. The side glass has been glued on, and this, I suspect, is where all of the fit problems are going to come all together and be magnified, because the next thing we've got to glue on is the air intake and the roof and the windshield. They've all been glued together, and I'm suspecting that right here is where all the fit problems are going to manifest themselves. Just a suggestion, if you do build this kit, don't do as the instruction says and as I did, and build the whole interior and then plop it in place. I would say put the floor and the rear bulkhead in place, glue it together, install it in the fuselage, build the fuselage, and then put your seats and everything in place, because you're going to be wrestling with this thing quite a bit. And fortunately, there was an extra control column on the parts because I ended up losing mine. Oh, big surprise that. I'm kind of surprised that I only lost one part of the cockpit, at least during the gross assembly of all the big parts. So I would suggest that you put the cabin bulkhead and the floor in place, put all the major assemblies together, and then, like I said, put your seats and your control columns and things in place later. And that's the whole thing all buttoned up. We now have the whole fuselage put together. Of course, we still got legs to put on and everything like that. And of course, I remind you that this will look neater once the outside has been painted. This is just the framing painted so we can see it through that nose window. And by golly, you can look up inside there and see the cyclic controls in the back of the instrument panel and everything, so I guess it was worth it. And the view through the side windows isn't too bad either. There's a little bit of distortion, but I've seen a lot worse from mainstream kits. A lot of gaps I've got to work on. That's a bad one. And there's one on the other side. And there's a couple around here that need to be addressed. And of course we have all kinds of minor ones all the way up along here. This is going to need to be addressed. And then we've got this step to work on. Nothing that is unsolvable. And like I said, really all things considered, all these complex parts came together pretty well. So this is the point at which I say, well, gee, I'm sorry I didn't get it done this week. But I think this is a fairly complicated model. At least we've got the major pieces together. And I get the feeling I'm going to be doing a lot of puttying and a lot of sanding. Repeat, repeat, repeat. So, thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on modeling, and my weight update will follow.